world where people move based on what's trending, sometimes we can lose focus on what impact and sustainability really mean. There are so many impact companies out there or impact investors, but can we really say that the startups ecosystem is ready to really support impact startups? Who better to have this discussion with than Andrew Brisbin, the Director of Ventures at Alia and an expert in the impact startup world. Passionate about tech and creative solutions for good, Andrew helps founders and problem solvers to take on their solutions to scale with various support programs and Alia's Impact Fund exploring capital solutions. From building financial models and pitch decks to launching educational apps, Andrew thrives on working with founders to accelerate change. Welcome to the Mary Poppins of Startups Light Show. I'm Naily Makangu from Athena Leaders. As a tech consultant and startup advisor, I will answer live the burning question that you have on your way to Series A+. Subscribe and tune in every week for top tips to meet amazing guests such as Andrew, startup founders, investors, and more. More importantly, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Honestly, whenever I hear anybody speak about me, especially what even, it's just a general intro, I always feel like, oh man, I have a high expectation to live up to. So I'm hoping we could deliver today.
I'm pretty sure that we can deliver. And my only worry is that we might not be able to have the time to cover all of the amazing topics that you can really speak about today, because I know this episode is going to be fantastic. For those who haven't had the pleasure to meet you and get to know you as I have, do you mind telling them a little bit about who you are and the amazing work that you do at Alia?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. And thank you for having me here, of course. The work at Alia really is built on seeing how we can amplify the great work that other people are doing in society. And so that can range from a pure startup, one that is thinking about going for equity. But we also support social enterprises and local businesses who can make an impact locally and nationally, because we believe that there's a lot of opportunity to really be creative about what entities, organizations can really make a difference in the world. And so at Alia, we actually run a variety of accelerator programs that are designed to help people one step back from, I guess, the challenges that they're facing on a day-to-day operational basis, but also to step back and say, hey, how do we take this to a strategic level so that when we think about what will really be a meaningful kind of level up for us, that we give them the space to do that and the tools and the resources needed to kind of unlock that capacity. Because we think that, honestly, it's a very tough journey to be a founder or an entrepreneur that is trying to go for funding, a social enterprise leader. All these journeys are extraordinarily lonely. And we want to be a resource and a champion for those people who are navigating that journey, because it's not something that is easy to do by yourself. So most of our work, admittedly, is in the UK at the moment. I don't sound like I'm from the UK, but that's kind of the nature of the game. I am here in the UK, and we support as many people as we can. And I think the last 2 years or so, I think I've worked with 250 different entrepreneurs. And I think that's on the low end of my number that I'm counting, because we support people with grants, creative impact finance, the accelerator programs. And it really kind of comes together to try to create a holistic suite of services that can help people. And I guess the novel aspect of our work is that we're a charity, right? We actually are approaching this from a very open and inclusive approach to see how can we support these people without charging them fees, because ultimately society already has the fee game figured out, and we want to broaden access and inclusivity to those who are thinking of problems differently. And I think that's what's needed in the impact ecosystem. So it's been fun. It's challenging. It's a lot of work. But yeah, that's what we do.
And I can definitely say that I've loved, over the last 3 years or so, I have been a mentor for Ali. I've loved working with the team and also meet incredible entrepreneurs. And as you said, there are so many challenges that people go through, especially when it comes to the impact space or even the social enterprise space. And it's great to see what you guys do to really boost them and push them forward. For those who might not be clear on what they actually mean, how would you define an impact startup?
It's a great question. First off, you're 100% correct in saying that this journey is not one that you can do by yourself. Your expertise has been incredible for the entrepreneurs that we've supported. An impact startup, the people that you've been helping throughout this journey, they're not just one type of business, right? There are lots of different structures that people are employing these days. We see people who are using cooperatives. We see people who are using, a traditional business who is going to go raise equity from VC angels and et cetera, right? You see a lot of that specifically in the climate tech space. You see that in some of the social impact issues. So these are founders who've created a business model that ultimately is trying to align themselves with some kind of social impact or environmental impact. Maybe it's aligned along the ESG themes, right? Typically, they're trying to move the business forward in some consequential way that, as it relates to maybe a UN Sustainable Development Goal, and say, hey, every time that we grow commercially, we also grow as an impact on society or an impact on the planet or, the environment. So, there's lots of different ways that an impact startup can be defined. Right now, there are so many different businesses that are out there who are claiming that they're impact startups that it's really hard to know what is exactly the right definition. I don't think that you can necessarily say that there is one, right? Because you probably will get somebody saying, hey, Facebook is an impact startup. And you're like, well, I mean, yeah, I guess, but their claim for that impact is that we've tied more people together, and therefore we can create social momentum to solve a big issue because they have Facebook Gives, and maybe Amazon will claim that, right? And they'll say, we connect people and can create small businesses. And you ask, is that really an impact startup? Oof. I mean, at this point, obviously they're no longer startups, but I think we probably would question, what is the legitimacy of an impact business, and how is there a limitation to how big an impact business can be without maybe losing its values. So yeah, it's a tough question to answer because I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think it requires a shift maybe in mindset and in thinking about values possibly. If that's where I would start, I would probably say that.
Yes, and I agree on the value bit as well, because sometimes, again, marketing, and there's also a bit of a greenwashing where people say now, if you use the word like circular economy, sustainability, impact, customers might be more attracted to you, but it's really about the value chain, as you said, and the different model that they use. Now, one thing that I have to say, when we start looking at the investment aspect, as this is normal. Investors are not charities or donors, but there's a lot of investors out there that are now branding themselves as well as impact investors. Yet the way they select startups might not change based on the normal or standard startup and the impact versus the non-impact startups. What are your views on this branding again of impact investors?
I think that if we were to step back, right, and say that ultimately we need to see a different values system when it comes to how we build business, I think that in itself will lead to a different type of impact investor. So let me give you an example. I guess when I'm thinking about an impact startup, right now there is immense pressure in society to say, if you're not extremely commercially viable, you're not viable, like period. And I mean that just as in like they won't even consider you. And I say this because I think of Silicon Valley and I think of the typecast that is created amongst the investor world, where an individual will say, hey, we're looking for 100, 1000x returns. And, that is the nature of venture capital, right? Like venture capital is looking to create outsized returns for an investor base in a highly risky space. And so if you're thinking about an impact startup, they're dealing with this pressure in society to say, I can be viable commercially and I can create a meaningful impact in society. But at the same time, they are told that funding goes to those who generate outsized profit returns. If we are to really rethink the business world, even, we will have to learn to prioritize different types of returns. And that's uncomfortable, right? Because, from a financial standpoint, money does make the world go round per se, right? Yeah. But if you are actually going to be thoughtful about the long-term implications of what a pure play, profit-driven system will create, you end up with consequences or outcomes that we did not anticipate would manifest in our lives. And I point to climate change as being an example of that, where whole ecosystems are stripped of its resources for the benefit of profit. And we say, hey, that was a great return. But at what cost, right? We didn't measure the cost of investing aggressively in the harvesting of these resources, right? We said, oh yeah, it's fun. Let's just take all of this out of the ground to make our smart cars, right? To make our electric cars, to make our batteries for the smartphones. And you say, okay, that's great. Or is it, right? But all we've done is measured profit. So in this journey for the entrepreneur or the investor, when they're thinking about, how am I going to keep going in this ecosystem, profit is the number one motive, at least in many circles. And so the impact entrepreneur is facing this pressure from society and from the investor to deliver these commercial returns. And at the same time, are pressured to say, hey, you have to be a good founder and generate some impact returns, right? Because they're trying to live a, maybe a more, what's the right word here? Maybe they're trying to be more considerate of the whole picture of the economy, right? The whole value chain, as you said earlier, right? Of what is actually being utilized in this journey to create value. And most people don't put a dollar symbol on impact values, right? So that could be a social impact, right? If I were able to be, addressing an issue of homelessness, for instance, right? And I was able to say, I've gotten 50 people off of the streets. The investor or the financially driven investor is not necessarily looking for that return, right? They're looking for the return that comes maybe 2 steps away from that. And that is the challenge that we find in trying to capture those metrics and say, I want to be an impact-driven entrepreneur, an impact-driven investor. There's a mismatch between how we define value for impact and how we define value for the dollar sign. And so when the impact investor then is now coming into this ecosystem and saying, I want to invest in this, right? They are still competing with people who are going for that 100x, 1000x returns. So how do you tell a person in the world, hey, I will give you less than 100x returns and generate a social impact or an environmental impact and get them on board, right? That requires a really powerful story. It requires a really powerful narrative to get people to invest their monies in VC and then VC to deploy that capital. But the challenge is, right, there's not enough of that in this world at this moment. So impact investors are going out and saying, hey, we're impact investors, but haven't changed the mechanic of how they determine value, right? They still measure things based off of how much profit will you generate? When will you generate that return? And, how am I going to get my exit? And that, I understand that, right? This is not an indictment, but it is a question of if we play the same game and make the same requirement upon our entrepreneurs and upon our investors, then can we really expect anything different, right? Is impact investing truly different if we make the same rules and expect the same outcomes? Oh,
Yes.
tough
Yeah,
one.
I love it's a very tough one. And in fact, as you are explaining the kind of the challenges and what's currently happening with this world of impact investors, it's actually making me think about as well the other part of the startup ecosystem, which of course brings in the consumers, the people who buy the product or the services made by impact startups. There is this thing about pushing people to be very transparent about the supply chain, the sustainability, where, for example, where you get your coffee from, how it's benefiting the planet. Yet on the other side, there's the ripple effect from that, which is, of course, prices going higher than other similar products that might not be as sustainable. And now it also becomes a problem on the consumers. On one hand, you want to see X, Y, Z, but on the other hand, are you prepared to rethink your buying decisions to bring on this idea of sustainability so that the world as a whole becomes a bit more sustainable?
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? I don't want to use this as a platform to discourage people because it really does require the consumer to think differently, right? And I think that is a big challenge for our generation, to think differently about the stories that we tell when it comes to engaging with products. Because if we were to be completely transparent with ourselves, buying more and more stuff just means that we need more and more resources. More and more resources clearly is not a long-term viable kind of approach, because nothing is infinite, right? We do not have infinite resources here on this planet to say we can just keep going and going and going. And so if we were to be completely transparent, we would say, oh, let's just stop everybody from buying things, right? But that's never going to happen, right? So if we're going to be clear with ourselves and honest with ourselves, we have to find a way to convince people that investing in products, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a big investment, right? It could just be possibly more expensive, right? And I'll explain why I think it's more expensive. More expensive products because we have to be more conscious of the finite nature of things. And unfortunately, that requires a lot of self-awareness, right? I mean, like, wow, to be so conscious of the world around us and the effects that our purchases have on other people, it requires that we step back from ourselves and reflect on big issues. And that's not exactly human nature, right? So that is one problem, right? And I think it's a worthy problem. And I think a lot of people are addressing it. But then the second problem, right, around why, when we think about sustainable products and, sustainable startups really have to figure this out. How do we consider the fact that sustainable products on average will probably cost a little bit more? And the reason for that is because they are accurately representing the costs as it relates to creating a product, right? We have become so numbed to the idea that we can just buy things nonstop, and it's just $1, $2, a pound, £2, right? And we just come to this idea that we're like, oh, we can afford this as a society. We can keep doing this. But that's just, if you were to think about the pie of the world, right? And say all the resources sit in here, and we keep taking out resources to make our, plastic products, our fast fashion clothes, and all these things. Well, the resource pie over here is getting smaller, right? So therefore, scarcity declares that this will become more expensive, right? So we are playing a game in which we are eating up all the resources of this planet and not necessarily giving it an accurate price, because it's so deflated by poor labor standards, by oppressive practices in third world countries, where we're literally putting people in slave kind of labor situations, right? We've had this happen year after year. Child labor here, poor working conditions here. We don't need to dream to try to find these examples. They exist in our society, in the news all the time. But we've become numb to the idea that it's costing somebody something somewhere, right? And we're just saying it's not us. So sustainable products is a very hard one, because you now compete with people who have the low price point at a significant, possibly social or human cost. And then you have your 20-pound pair of socks, which may be sustainably sourced, but good God, that's hard, right? Like, who wants to pay 20 pounds for a pair of socks? I think most people can't pay for 20 pounds pair of socks. I mean, I can't pay for a 20-pound pair of socks. So how do we keep doing that? How do we live in an environment like that? And I think this is where storytelling is the most important aspect of a impact startup's trajectory to success, right? If you can tell a powerful story, you can convince people that it is worthwhile to take on a different lifestyle or a different behavior practice as it relates to purchasing. And that's going to be a big challenge for us.
Yeah, and I definitely agree on especially the storytelling aspects of this. As in fact, the episode just the one previous to this, I think it was episode number 79, I believe, we talked a little bit about conscious consumerism and what they actually mean, and some example of storytelling. And this is something I'm really excited to also find out a little bit more about, how you help impact startup when they come on that journey to push their voice much stronger. Because in next episode as well, I'm bringing another startup where it's a similar aspect of things, where they've made, I think it's razors from recycled plastic from the ocean up in Scotland. And now they're on the journey of creating more beauty products made of recycled products. But of course, you have to think about the impact that it has financially for them to be able to do that and resell the product in a way that can help them be more viable. So I'm really excited to hear about their stories and how they are sharing that to the world so that they can connect with their consumers. But from your point of view and the work that you do personally, of your own personal journey, and also the work that's being done in Alia, how do you help startups to pitch and tell their stories, right? Because as we all know, being a startup founder, there's a lot of passion there, there's a lot of skill set and
Yeah.
experience, but not everybody will have a marketing background, or they are strong storytellers, or they're good at sales and all of those kind of things they pick up along the way. And I believe that at Alia is something that you help them with that. So how can you, for example, if we have any impact startups founders listening and thinking, oh my God, storytelling is all well and good and all of that, but how there are some tips that they can use to start bringing that into themselves, that to be more effective as they're building their startups?
Great question. Great question. And this is the everyday battle for us, right? We are thinking about different ways to tell compelling stories for our entrepreneurs, because ultimately we aren't the subject matter experts, right? And to be fair, most investors, they're not going to have the depth of expertise that you as an entrepreneur will have in building your company, right? So we have to strike a very delicate balance between being technical and compelling at the same time, painting a kind of a beautiful story that just excites them, right? So think about the values of the person you're telling the story to, right? If you are talking to a VC who maybe admittedly really prioritizes the consumer market returns, right, and is really just looking at big market returns in terms of the valuation of your company and how many products you'll sell, you obviously will be tailoring your narrative to them to make sure that you are telling a story as to why it is compelling that so many people are actually making purchases within this consumer space. Now, you have to strike the balance of telling an aspiring story, as well as showing how you have evidence points that speak directly to that aspirational journey. You can't just go in and say, hey, we're doing a sustainable product business and slap sustainability on the top of it. That doesn't work, right? Like, sustainability is a accepted idea, right? Transparency to that is accepted, but that is not making your business particularly unique usually, right? Unless you are creating a transparency software, right? And maybe that is what you are solely focused on. But if you're a business that is creating a product and then you say, hey, the distinguishing value here is transparency, well, that is a nice benefit. It is what we should all be doing, and unfortunately will not be distinguishing enough to an investor to say, oh yes, therefore I should invest in you. No, because ultimately the core value of your product, you are trying to solve a problem for someone, right? That solving of a problem for someone should be inclusive of transparency, but transparency is not the end all be all, right? It is definitely one step in the journey, unfortunately, right? So while you're thinking about a narrative that inspires someone, right, tell them what excites you about the future, right? What resonates with you as being a compelling story. And obviously you should be testing this with others to make sure that they also find it inspiring and something to aspire to. Then you need to be able to give them evidence points as to why your product or your service is so well suited to getting to that inspirational / aspirational point, right? There has to be a one-to-one relationship for them to be able to say, I understand how you're going to go from here, this evidence point that you've done today, and get to this magical state of being the impact unicorn or the impact the zebra, right? Some people call it a zebra. So in this journey, you can't just expect people to understand how impact matters, right? You have to tell the story as to why impact matters specifically for your instance, and why that will make a distinguishing value add or a differentiator to the investor or the stakeholder. And I think this is something that can be practiced over and over again with mentors, advisors, friends. Be careful about friends, right? Friends don't necessarily give you always the most critical feedback, and you need that critical feedback. You need to hear someone else give you real opinions on the story that you told, because friends, they love you, right? They're there to support you on that journey, but they're not necessarily always going to be brutally honest with you.
I agree. Sometimes I always say, first start with strangers and then go to friends, or maybe start with friends to get that feeling of, yes, I'm in the right direction, but as quickly as you can, go and speak to other people that maybe they don't know you, or
100%.
their first thought is not your safety and your well-being, because otherwise you're gonna get amazing feedbacks all the time, but it might
Yeah.
not actually be useful for you. And in fact, the storytelling and this education piece is something that I'm also kind of keeping my eyes out a lot to
Mm.
find great ideas of startups that I've seen online or that I might have worked with. There's one that's called Meat Freed, and I was it was interesting what they're doing, because of course they're building a platform to help people who want to eat less meat. But one thing I like about the idea of helping in a sustainability world is not telling people kind of what to do. It's not about stop eating meat, which is again something that I hear a lot online, but as a storytelling and pitching and helping people think about their buying decision, does that actually help them when you tell them to stop eating meat, or when you tell them to eat less for XYZ reasons, and also provide communities and resources on how people can do that. And I think that's also another great way, if you're a startup out there thinking about, from everything that Andrew said on how you can tell your story and push it out there from the investment and also consumer perspective, but also to help people.
For sure. I 100% agree with that. I think, we have to be conscious that not everybody will share the same values as us, right? And so we have to be comfortable with taking people on that journey with us, because that's how we see a tidal wave of change, right? You have to consider that, let's just say you're a European startup, right? And you're here in the UK and you're thinking about the issues and the values of your customers. Remember that there are huge, huge markets out there with very different lived experiences, right? The US is a completely different landscape. China, completely different. India, again, completely different, right? And these are just 3 of a couple continents, right? Where people are doing very different things in terms of what they value, what they prioritize, right? If you go to the US, one of the things that you always hear is that it's so big, right? Well, if you go into a supermarket in there, you'll be shocked by how much plastic you see there. You'll be shocked by how many people are constantly living the consumerist life. And so how do we get them to come along on this journey, right? It's not enough to just say, we're going to change Europe. Unfortunately, that's not enough to make, a global difference, right? You should, if your focus is saying, hey, I want to change Europe first, that's fine. I support you, right? There's no indictment. There's no judgment. But just remember that if you're trying to engage people across, disparate societies, right, there are going to be very different values at play. So thinking about the narrative and how you get people to come on that journey with you, as you said, Naila, I think is really powerful.
Yes, definitely. And again, when we talk about this idea of the global thing, one thing I'd like to also get your point of view, because I see you did mention collaboration in the beginning of this episode, but I want to get your thought a little bit about collaboration and partnerships, especially for impact startups. But just to kind of, for anybody who wanted to find out a little bit more, definitely when it comes to storytelling, rewatch this video again, some of the amazing advice that Andrew's been sharing with us. And we also have episode 79, which is how startups can design products to support the circular economy. And 81 is the one I talked about, the plastic shaving, the shaving razor, I forgot what it's called again. How a startup is building products for conscious consumers. So I think those are also going to give you a few ideas on how to tell the story. But of course, as I've mentioned, Alias is great, is out there, and they do have a lot of programs you can go to really help you with, from mindset to strategy to storytelling, pitching, and so much more.
Yeah.
Now, on this topic of when we start looking in a little bit on this kind of view of the changing landscape and the impact startups, one thing I've always wondered, and I think maybe it's the right time to ask you that question, because I don't think I did in our prior conversation, is why are you so passionate about impact startup as you, Andrew, the human being?
Yeah, I think it's been one that I think didn't come to me automatically. I mean, I definitely did not think that I would be in this spot 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I was in Texas, and I had finished my MBA, and at that point I was thinking, I just want to go for a job that would be, I guess, rewarding financially, honestly. And I think at that point, I prioritized that. And I think that once I was in that job, and I think many people have experienced this, that once I was in my corporate job and doing life, as it were, right, I didn't find that to be rewarding. I didn't find that to be as exciting as I guess, honestly, my life could be. And I'm not trying to paint it out as it needs to be this roller coaster, but I just didn't feel like that I was contributing something to make a difference. And so that was, I guess, probably the starting point for me to start thinking that, maybe I need to do something different. And I had made a switch into being a small business owner. And that started kind of getting me into the mindset of thinking, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? What are the challenges that entrepreneurs face? I moved to the UK, and then that opportunity arose that I was able to participate and join a startup. And in that process, I learned a lot about what happens to capital, what happens to the people who are working in the sector, and honestly, the game-changing ideas that people have. And I thought that it would be a terrible, terrible waste for all the money that is allocated to the startup sector for it to not be effectively used to make a difference in the world. And so when I was thinking about how could I make a difference, I realized that all the experiences that I had across my years of working, I guess it's been 15 years now at this point, that I recognize that there are better ways to manage a business, that people are missing out on kind of, I don't want to say easy to address issues, but there are a lot of things that people can deal with when they have other people to provide feedback, provide guidance, and to give, transparent, I guess, thoughtful criticisms and comments, because a lot of people are really just missing that circle of support. And so for me, it was saying, how can I build a circle of support for entrepreneurs who are in the impact space? How can I accelerate their work? How can I do something different? And that's what landed me here, because ultimately, Ale gave me the platform to be able to say, how can we create, tools and scalable solutions for people so that they can go on to the next level? And so this impact journey was not one that I thought would ever happen, quite honestly. Like, I didn't think I would ever be in this sector. I'm thrilled that it has happened, because I have met so many incredible people who have been working on impact issues for decades. And, they inspire me. They teach me so much about what are the possibilities, what are the potential innovations that need to be created in the next 5-10 years. And there's so much to be done that I think that there's plenty of room to grow and to kind of develop myself, and hopefully contribute to the well-being of others who are making impactful products, services that hopefully will, do seriously consequential things for our planet in a good way. So that's at least how I came to this part of the journey. And I think for me, I would 100% repeat it, honestly.
No, it's a beautiful story. And to be
Thanks.
honest, I really agree with you when you say, when you saw people really struggling and thinking, is there a better way to do that? Because I've always been a bit of an entrepreneur myself, even if I say that I always have like one full-time job, and then I will go and do a lot of crazy things running non-profit and for the charity.
Yeah.
But I guess, I think we talked about that, the one-to-one tech product mentoring sessions that are run for free every month. It kind of came out of the same thing that you're talking about. I've interviewed and I've spoken to so many founders out there, and they have, I think, this is another thing I'm passionate about, the startup world, because you have so many incredible people out there, but they're just bonkers enough to go into one of the most difficult fields, trying to build a business that is not just good for them. We talked about the profit side, but also for the world, which is even more incredible with everything that we are talking to. And sometimes some of them fall between the cracks, right? So imagine all of the amazing people with great ideas, but they might not have had the chance to meet you and me, or me, and they just gave up. I actually spoke to one woman who was in that solution. She tried to build a startup, couldn't find a vision, and after a year, she was completely burnt out. And I worked with her until now. She's out there looking for. She's now starting a startup where they're looking into how can you reduce waste in the construction industry, also using software and a bit of fintech principles.
Amazing.
So I think it's, yes, I'll definitely say yes. A lot of weird, random people out there with so much passion, but I just absolutely love them, because to be fair, you and I are a little bit bonkers ourselves.
Yeah, I think it does require a certain level of, I don't want to say crazy, but just this kind of level of like that energy that is willing to take a really big, like, this is a big risk for a lot of people, right? And I don't want any startup founders, to beat themselves up over the idea that, it's going poorly, right? Because it is hard. It's a very tough journey, and it's not one that, like, statistically speaking, right? If you think about even just VC, the majority of VC investments fail, right? And that's with money. So if you're an entrepreneur without money and, things are hard, please remember that, this is not a reflection on you necessarily, right? This is a reflection on the fact that this is a challenging thing to build something up. And remember that it takes time, right? There are, like, all the startups that are out there, all the big ones especially, right? They have taken many, many years to get to this point. It's not something that you can just say, boop, I'm solving all the world's problems here and now, right? It takes serious commitment and grit to be able to get to that next level. So
Yeah.
I hope you stay strong out there.
Yes, go on, keep going. And continue to look into this world of, some of the changes in mindsets and in the way that we need to work to support impact startups. The other discussion that I hear a lot is when it comes to collaboration and building more partnerships. Because before, of course, growing as a business, you do need to collaborate, but there is a sense and a feeling that to be able to really impact the world, especially when you look at circular economy and sustainability, there is an emphasis on doing it together in collaboration. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that, and how do you apply that when you work with startups?
Collaboration is a really powerful tool, because ultimately you have to be cognizant that your time is limited, right? And that you have a finite capacity to be able to change the world and the things around you every single day. And so when you're thinking about collaboration, collaboration is something that really can unlock a lot of capacity for you, because you are able to build on the strengths of other groups. Now, I really caution people about collaborating for collaboration's sake, just to put a name on it, because, the same thing that happens with grants, where you get money in and then you suddenly are starting to focus on delivering that project. You may think that that project is like a small side project and doesn't really, like, you can funnel off some resources and deliver a big, objective for your core product. But too often that ends up being a distraction, right? It ends up taking away from what your core focus is. And the same danger happens with collaboration, right? If you're collaborating needlessly or purposelessly, right? Like, then you end up being in a position where you're just dedicating a resource to managing a relationship. And relationships are beautiful, right? Because if they're used effectively to deliver a core value that you're both aligned on, it will be a very powerful relationship that can really transform the lives of those affected by it. Yeah. But you have to be conscious and very deliberate about how you partner with other people, right? Because your time at the end of the day is limited to, let's just say 8 hours that you have in a day. And that seems generous, right? Because you're going to have life, you're going to have to sleep, you have to eat. Like, these are things that you should be doing, right? And if you have a family, yes. Wow, even more time gone, right? So in this journey, like, you have to be conscious that you have such little time, and it has to be preciously managed and carefully managed, maybe even ruthlessly managed, right? To ensure that you're delivering to what your core proposition is. If you're not delivering to your core proposition with this collaboration, then why are you doing it, right? Is it just there to give you a name that you said you've done it? There are better collaborations to be had, right? Like, there are plenty of people who can probably be aligned with you in this journey, right? It just is, it's a little bit painful to go find them, right? And this is the powerful thing about communities of like-minded individuals, whether they be a local meetup, a pub and pint kind of conversation. There's a great group called Planet and Pint, right? You can find those activities, right? There are international organizations, there are national groups, there are local groups. Each one of those groups brings together like-minded individuals. And unfortunately, you'll have to go to these things to connect with people, to see if they share the same values, and to make sure that you're being, be transparent and honest with them about what core result or core objective are you trying to deliver to, because that ultimately will define your next level up, right? If you're not ruthlessly focusing on your core proposition, you're probably wasting time.
Yes. And I definitely love this angle on creating partnerships, because people sometimes feel, whether they approach someone, they've been approached, they feel like, especially when you're struggling and there's so many things to do, like, yes, it's a great opportunity, let's jump in it. But if it's not aligned with your core values and objectives, instead it's just a complete waste of time and a waste of energy.
Yeah. And it's okay. Remember the sunk cost component, right? Like, if you've committed a resource to it and you've done it, right? That's okay, right? What did you learn from that process? Hopefully there's something significant, even if it didn't align, that you can very clearly say, we use this as evidence to further our goals, right? To further focus ourselves. And that's okay too, right? Like, it's not like we're we're not perfect beings, right? Like I'm guilty of it too. And here I am talking about this where I've spent time on things that probably don't deliver to my end objective of creating maybe a sustainable business model or an impact organization that has scale, right? All these things are very human, right? You will make mistakes. I've already made them. I'll probably make some more pretty soon.
Don't worry, I'm sure I'm on that boat as well. Yes, because one thing I've learned, yes, I mean, again, coming from not coming from a sales and business development background, I felt like even just my own personal journey as an entrepreneur, and there's a lot of that I had to learn in terms of what does it even mean when you said creating partnerships. Because most of the time when we look online and people announce partnership, it's always the big brands, people who are very vocal. But as usual, what we see online is the end game of the journey that someone has taken over several years. Yeah. And so when working with startups, it's really interesting to get them to think about partnerships based on the journey where they at and the people around them that can support them or that can amplify the product in a very simple way as well.
Yeah, that's very true. It's hard. It's really hard as humans, right, to think long term, right? Because these journeys, they just take so much time to build out something of staying power, right? It's so challenging. Like I don't think I ever appreciated how much time it takes to build something that matters. And that can just, I mean, even like even on a pure profit, like I'm going to make a lot of money kind of thing. I don't think I appreciated how much time it can take, right? There are obviously rags to riches stories that happen overnight, right? But I'm not looking for a GameStop kind of crypto coin kind of explosion kind of situation here, right? I'm trying to create long-term value. And I think that's something founders need to remember, right? Create long-term value that has staying power, because plenty of people can raise money and get really great valuations. But there are plenty of companies that will lose billions of dollars in valuations. And it happens all the time, right? We've seen it with many companies. We see it in the public stock market. We see it with Facebook. We see it with WeWork. We see it with all the big tech companies losing billions of dollars over the last year in market cap. It happens all the time, right? So what is long-term value, right? Make sure you're prioritizing that.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of what you talked about, the long-term planning, again, one of the things I love to talk about, whether it's in mentoring program or even I've talked about that as well on the live, is the thing that, as founders, sometimes it's very quick to move, but it's really important to create that space where you're actually thinking and create a plan for you to work on long-term things that might not give you revenue directly or even build the relationship that you want. And I usually call that having dinner with the queen, but of course now that the queen is gone, I've changed it to having dinner with Serena Williams, because she's my queen of tennis and
there we go.
In the entrepreneur world.
Love it. Yeah.
And the idea is that imagine if you booked your half a day or 1 hour having dinner for me with Serena Williams. It doesn't matter what happened on that day, and any member of my team, they will not interrupt me unless the world was really falling over. So that time is really going to be about me having dinner with that person. So I use that as a way of getting people to think about long-term planning and the importance to actually book the time, because partnerships, the things that might not be glamorous or sexy or that exciting, especially when you first start, takes a lot of time, like you said, but they are very important for the growth of your business.
Amen to that. Yeah. 100%. 100%. There are so many things that we just don't appreciate. And this is the struggle with our society, right? Is that we associate value with certain key moments, and that value tends to be dollar signs or pound signs or hero signs, right? We tend to prioritize those things that can be perceived as revenue generating or money moments, right? But there's a lot of things that create value within an organization that are just not glamorous, right? That without those unglamorous things, you would never have those money moments, right? Like you have to build the foundations of the house before you can build, or before you can paint the walls, right? So that's what has to happen.
Yeah. So before we go, and I will not forgive myself if I don't ask you this question, or I will maybe find you and even talk about it. So you might as well do it now. Can you tell us a little bit more about the impact funds that you are currently working on with the amazing team at Alia?
Yeah, so this is our attempt at figuring out how can we show that we are truly prioritizing the creation of long-term value, but also being understanding of the challenges that face social entrepreneurs, tech for good entrepreneurs, and local business. So we're in the process of piloting a concept, which we've tentatively called the Alia Impact Fund, right? Where we're saying, how can we prioritize the values of long-term value creation, without necessarily demanding the returns of Silicon Valley, which often prioritize unsustainable growth and possibly practice that might be possibly maybe more damaging to the company than productive, right? So we're trying to figure out, are there ways that we can create a investment vehicle that provides capital social entrepreneurs, tech for good entrepreneurs, while at the same time rewarding and benefiting both parties as the enterprise grows. And so there's a thing called the revenue participation agreement. That is something that is being trialed across multiple funds these days. It's not widely known. It's not also widely in use yet. And so it's something that we're trying to explore to see, is this a tool that's viable to accelerate local change, national change, global change, right? And if we can contribute to that, we will, right? So we're in the process of working through this with our alumni to see if there are appropriate deals that make sense for both parties, right? We're really focused on being a thoughtful and purposeful investor or enabler, right? We don't want to say that there is one model that fits all, and we're trying to be creative about what that looks like. So we haven't defined out, are we going to take this to a big fund level, right? Right now, we're focusing on how can we see if this creates its own evidence points that we can say in line with being a startup ourselves, right? How can we really invest in people and show that there's an evidence or a track record that makes a difference, right? If we can prove that, then we'll be at a place where we'll be very happy to say, you know what, we're going to go to the market, we're going to create a fund. But that's a long-term journey, right? We're cognizant that, we don't have all the answers here and now. And so we want to do our best to put our best foot forward, right? And say, we're willing to put our money where our mouth is and say, let's explore what it means to be a purpose-led investor. Let's not hold ourselves to the same standards as Silicon Valley. But of course, who wants to invest in something that's going to lose loads of money, right? Like, that's not the idea, right? It really is about being intelligent, about making a difference and enabling founders who've put in a lot of work and have demonstrated that they can use funds effectively. So I think we have a competitive edge in the sense that we know the people that we work with, and I encourage everybody to join us and be part of that program journey. So we have programs that we run. We'd love to hear from you. But yeah, it's not something that's going to happen overnight, right? Because as I said, it takes time. So we're putting our best foot forward and saying some prayers, crossing some fingers, and seeing if we can make a difference for some impactful entrepreneurs.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. And in fact, I also love the fact that your expertise and expertise of the organization is really about helping startups. And whilst you are doing that and making such a huge impact already with the Impact Fund, it's kind of you as well taking the steps of being a startup in this world and using your own principles to kind of grow.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to find out about the birth and follow the story, as I'm sure this is it's only the beginning, as you said, so it's gonna keep on flourishing. And I can see the impact is going to have on startups in that space. And who knows, it might also really, as we were discussing earlier, push other investors at the moment to kind of have strong metrics and strong example they can see on how they can redefine themselves based on the current work that you're currently doing and leading the way to get there.
Yeah, I think so. I think that would be our dream state, right? That we can see other people being inspired by our example, or even motivated by our example, right? We don't have to be so bold as to claim, that we need to transform everything. But, our hope is that, another person will take action based off of what we do, and that creates its own amplification of impact, right? So every step that we do, we're trying to think purposefully about how can we accelerate the good work of other people, right? Because we know it's not us, right? We know it's other people who are doing really cool things. It's you founders out there who are fighting the good fight. And so we hope that, we can be a champion for you.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks a lot, Andrew, for sharing so openly, going into this discussion, and the work that you're even doing as an individual and as well as a director of Ventures and Alia to really push in this space of impact startups and just all of the various programs that's there to help entrepreneurs. anyone listening, whether you are an entrepreneur yourself, startup founder, or you know someone who's probably need a bit of help in terms of their vision, their ideas, they feel like, oh my God, we talk about partnerships, we talk about storytelling and so much more. How can we get the support? Then please do and check out Andrew on LinkedIn and find out more about Alia. And I'm sure he will direct you to the amazing team that work with him to help you. And there's a lot of amazing programs. As I said before, I'm a mentor, Dalia, and I can definitely say that I've seen a lot of great startups that I'm still connected with that goes out of the program and do something big in so many different industries. And for those who might be looking for a more technical aspect where you have your ideas already defined, but you want some help in terms of the product development and the technology, and how do you make sure that you work with the best engineers, how do you write requirements for them, and all of that kind of things, do get in touch with us, as we are running our one-to-one free tech product mentoring. And I believe that the one coming up in February 2023 will be based on impact startups as well. So if you need any help, drop by. We have a lot of experts that can help you navigate along those ways. So thank you, Andrew, for coming to the show. And I'm sure we're going to be continuing the discussion with you as well.
Amen. And thank you so much for having me. I think you do incredible work in the community and in the globe, honestly. So thank you for continuing to do this and create an inspiring example for other entrepreneurs, because we need to see more people like you leading the charge. So thank you for having me here.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Andrew.
Of course.
And for everybody out there, do remember, let's design a happy and productive workplace playground together.